Okay. VerkayRadio.com, certified #1 digital talk radio station in the world. The power of women.
Welcome to Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation with Margot Levette. Heard on VerkayRadio.com and worldwide on iHeartRadio. Women reinvented to become entrepreneurs, authors, speakers. Their second act is full of courage, full of how-tos, and inspiration. Now, let's get into the show. Here's your host, Margot Levette.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. As I always say, another episode, Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation. Well, today, I'm not even going to hold back on the name. We're speaking with author, international speaker, coach. This woman just does so much for not just the UK, but for the globe, for all of mankind. And our conversation is with Maggie Georgopoulos. Maggie is an award-winning authority on mental health in the workplace. And this is important. I want everybody to stop doing what you're doing right now. Listen. Mental health in the workplace, okay? She has a unique story which she shares about her own mental health journey as a change maker and leader in the workplace. She is a strong advocate of ingraining a strong understanding and support of mental health into the cultural psyche of organizations. From an early age, Maggie had a drive to understand why things work. And I think that's fascinating. She's quite the outgoing young lady, and I understand that I can see why she is curious that way. Be it machine or human, in her journey, she has come on one solid conclusion, that there is no normal. And we need to embrace true diversity if we are going to really be able to create stability and sustainable organizations. I'm taking it a step further, and I hope that she doesn't mind. Sustainable and profitable, be it corporate or be it your own entrepreneurial venture. So help me welcome Maggie Georgopoulos. Thank you, Maggie, for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you.
Well, I wouldn't have it any other way. Maggie was featured. She is the cover of Womel magazine. And I tell you, it's a beautiful, the coloring is beautiful. May 2019, she is the cover of Womel. And if I may say, they did an excellent job. Maggie, because of the content that you were able to deliver, it just really rounded out the conversation. So without further ado, your bio touches on so many points. And I know that May is Mental Health Month, but I choose to know that Mental Health Month is 24/7, 360, and this thing of mental health in the workplace. Can we start out with your interpretation, your definition of mental health, and how did you come to this definition?
Well, to me, I think the biggest mistake we make with mental health is when we hear the words, we think bad. Whether we actually think the word bad or just the emotions related to it, we just think bad. It's like people say mental health and it's like, oh my God, that's awful. We forget that everybody has mental health. You know, it's no different from our physical health. It's good, it's bad. Some days it's indifferent, but we've all got it, and that's, you know, part of how we function. It's the mental physicality of our bodies. And how I've come to, you know, this definition that, and it's something that we all have, and it's something that we all deal with every day, is by being human. And actually being open to the idea that, you know, just because somebody tells me something's a certain way doesn't mean that it has to be that way. So being inquisitive as well. And also just wanting to understand why people said I wasn't normal, or people looked at me like I was different, or people treated me like I was different because of the ways I did or saw or approached things.
Wow. Now you opened up another thought. the way you do things, the way you thought about things. Take us on, and we all have mental health.
Yeah.
Take us on your journey of mental health. What did that look like? When did you become aware of mental health? And we're going to lead this conversation up to what all of this has to do with the workplace.
Well, so for me, I suppose it wasn't actually the eye-opening moment, but it was the start of the journey, so to speak, was when I was 17, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And this came about as a result of the fact that me being super active, super involved, ducks of school type student, suddenly came home from school at the start of school holidays and spent the next 2 weeks crying, and I couldn't tell my parents why, and I couldn't explain to them why I felt the way I did. And fortunately for me at the time, I got a fairly accurate diagnosis, because quite often, particularly with bipolar disorder, the first time a doctor sees you, it's the depressive cycle. So they tend to only think it's the depression. But my parents explained the level of activity and the things that I do, and the fact that I didn't necessarily sleep a lot and things like that. So the doctor was actually able to see a far more full picture of me. So this student that was hypomanic, as in, crazy full of energy and had ideas and was doing an overload of subjects and was, responsible for running the school show and on the school council and on the volleyball team and on the table tennis team and in the cross country and the swimming and the overachiever to suddenly the student that's depressed, that's not, not because, I've suddenly got a bad result or something like that. I just was. So, and unfortunately from that experience, I ended up with a bad experience, because one of my teachers, when my parents told them what was going on, trying to get support, because I was in my final year of school. So I was doing what was called in Australia then, which is a HSC, or high school certificate. Basically it's, I think you guys do your SATs or something like that.
Yes.
It is. It's the things you get that get you into university.
Yes.
So we were at that stage. And, so my parents are explaining to the teachers what are going on to try and get the support. And I walk into my chemistry classroom, and my chemistry teacher's telling the other students that I'm crazy and I'm blaming everyone for my problems.
Oh, my. Oh.
So I learnt 2 lessons that day, and neither of them necessarily very good. And the first one was that you don't trust anybody. But the second one was that you don't tell anyone you've got a mental health condition, because they're going to believe there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So for the next 30 years, I basically travelled a journey with bipolar where I didn't share it with anybody. And it wasn't until I was writing my book, Up the Ladder in a Skirt, which we can talk about later, I wrote a chapter on mental health, and I got my best friend she was editing the book, because, it's part of her specialty. And she's, had struggled a lot with depression, and I'd been there to support her and all the rest of it. And I hadn't realised that not once in her journey over a 10-year period had I mentioned that I had bipolar. Mm. So it was suddenly this big opening of the fact that, and it had come just from one instant and a set of cognitive behaviours and biases that were set up from that instant at a very young age that basically tailored my actions for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But having said that, even though I didn't tell people that I had a mental health disorder, my successes in my life through my career and in my workplace all came from the fact that I had that mental health disorder. Because most of my achievements occurred because of a level of normal that was in my life that wouldn't have existed if I didn't have bipolar. So the ability to work long hours when I stepped up into the leadership roles, and the ability to actually think at the speed that I did on things, and some of the creativity actually came out of the disorder. So my successes were because of the disorder rather than despite it. And it's one of the things I now take into a workplace. Because what I realized when I look back over my career is, whilst as a leader, I was very supportive of people who had mental health conditions, or at some stage during their time in the workplace ended up with a mental illness, or as demonstrated, as I said, with my best friend, I was very supportive, and our friendship started with her being someone who worked for me. So, you know, all of those things, I was very supportive of that. What I didn't do, and I realized was the missing link that really makes a difference in creating real change within a workplace, is I never talked about the fact that part of the reason I was so supportive is I know what it's like to live with a mental health condition. Long-term, short-term, however you want to look at it, I know what it's like to not just live with one, but to work with it, to interact with society, to live my life with that mental health condition as part of my life and managing it so that I can be successful and still be the person I want to be. So, yeah.
And that takes, I mean, you are in a position to take the stigma out of having a mental health condition, because so many in the workplace, that is really taboo. And to say that my condition is a major contributor to my success, and you were very successful in a male-dominated field of industry. So you are able to show people how to turn what would be a downer into something that's really productive. That's interesting. Maggie, would you say that came out of your being transparent and your honesty and hindsight?
Yep. And it's been a journey in itself, because, as I said, realizing that I wasn't speaking about it, and I talk about it being a level of inauthenticity, but I don't necessarily mean that I was inauthentic. It was just something I didn't realize I'd been doing. But because I was someone who stands up and advocates, being a leader as yourself, leading in your own style, being yourself. So if you happen to be a particularly feminine leader, be a particularly feminine leader, regardless of your gender, because that's another big thing to me. I dislike giving gender to personality traits or the way we do things. But the point is being authentically you. And I realized that adding the fact that I had a mental health condition, and yes, okay, I'm the larger proportion of my career was during a period of time where you just didn't talk about mental health in the workplace. And it's still, even though we're growing and we're starting to get better about it, it's still not something we really talk about, because otherwise we wouldn't be getting all excited about someone sending out a letter saying that they're taking a mental health day. It isn't something we talk about yet, but I already had a platform and a voice, and I realized that because of what I've done and the fact that the voice that I give to it is not a story of things that have been bad that I've rectified and then gone on to do good after I've so-called fixed the mental health thing. It's a story of living with my mental health condition and creating success with the mental health condition, not despite of it, but because of it. And being able to turn the dialogue on its head and get people to understand that we're not just talking about diversity from the perspective of, I want to see more stories about, women of, who are from the Middle East, or Black women, or African women, or, just women in general, or I want to hear more stories about, transgender people, or more story those about their successes. But I can just turn it on its head another level to the fact that I want to hear the stories about the person with bipolar disorder who was successful, not the stories of, if you go to your fiction novel, the mother with bipolar was, loved by her kids but hated by her kids because she neglected them more of the time than she spent time with them. Or, the schizophrenic that was never able to properly connect with their family, or, the person who was depressed that never managed to do anything. I want to turn the stories on their heads. So I talk about my story and my successes, but I also introduce people that I've met along the way that I know that I've worked with that have things like anxiety disorders and depression and things like that, and still are successful and working and managing with those disorders in order to continue to create their success, because it is, it doesn't have to always be a part of you, but sometimes it is a part of you. And the point is, mental health is a part of us, and it's getting us to understand that dialogue of it being something that we need to talk about.
Wow. You are bringing excuse me, you are bringing society to a place where we should have arrived yesterday. And I'm glad that you're leading us to this place where we can be transparent, especially in the workplace, where most people spend 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, most of our lives. The conversation can be fabulous, as you say. You have this condition, but you still are successful. You're contributing. If a person didn't know, they wouldn't even know what's going on most times. So, wow, I so love this. And you are so authentic until people have had a chance to read about you on Forbes and Entrepreneur Magazine, HR Future, HRM, Human Resources Media. What I love is you've written your own book, Up the Ladder in a Skirt, Solidify Your Leadership, One Bold Step at a Time. And for you to tell your story is actually taking one bold step at a time. So you gave us some background on how you feel so deeply, this is your life, the mental health in the workplace. Now, you in your book, you are giving step-by-step strategies for climbing the corporate ladder. And I'm going to shift the focus a little bit and let everybody keep in mind, Maggie did this with a mental health disorder, if that's what we want to call it. She spread this thing out. She's just walking her life, her purpose. So can you give us just a few tips at the top of the book, some of the things that a person should do, a woman should do when they're getting on that corporate ladder and they're moving on up? What things should they have in mind?
Well, I always say that the first step that you've got to take, regardless of where you're starting from, when you're making your journey in your career and you're looking to climb, or even if you're looking to build your business and create the leadership within a business, whatever project it is you're putting together, is you need to know yourself first. And it's a mistake that we all make because we're so busy. And it comes out of the way the education system runs things. And we try to teach people that they should be like other people. Because we become so busy trying to be like other people, we lose ourselves. And what happens when you lose yourself is you lose connection to the way you communicate, the way you prefer to do things, what you're actually very good at, what gaps you have in the way you do things. And if you lose touch with that, then you have difficulty actually, taking those steps as a leader congruently. So that's not to say you won't take the steps. It just says that, you're going to spend a lot of time effectively fighting yourself on your leadership journey. And if you remove the fight with yourself, it makes it so much easier. And it's easy for me to say that because I've got 20/20 hindsight to put into action as well. So it's never a smooth journey, and we all make mistakes, but the big lesson is to learn from them. So if you understand yourself, then it makes it easier to understand, well, one of the big mistakes women in particular often make, but it's not just women, it's men of a particular personality type, is in that effort to prove that they're capable, to prove that they're part of the team, to prove that they can step up, is they often will take on work that people are just basically jumping with this idea that they can prove themselves by showing what they can do. And the problem with that is you will end up potentially with a load of work which is not in your wheelhouse. It's not your area of expertise. It's not what you're capable of doing. And what you end up doing is showing yourself up as being incapable rather than capable, because you've taken on work you should have never taken on. And whilst I understand that, there are things when we're working that we have to take on regardless of whether or not it does really fit, and it's a desperation. It's like, do you know what, right at the moment, you're the only member of the team that actually has the time to slide this in. That's conversations. And once again, it comes down to understand yourself properly, understand the people you're working with so that you know how to communicate properly, so you don't trap yourself into something that's going to do you damage and make someone else look good as a result of it.
Been there, done that. I raised my hand on that one. So busy trying to prove yourself and fit in, and you just better than sliced bread, as they say. It does mess for me. It really played a major part in how ineffective I was in my communication with the people that I was too direct. And I got to a place where it actually, it really almost made me look like a fool and incompetent because I was not working within my wheelhouse. It just really, oh my God, know yourself. And then don't be afraid of who you are. I hear you saying that also. Be okay with who you are. Be okay with your normal. Do you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And it is something that we all find difficult because one of the comments I commonly get is it's okay for you to say that because you're really self-aware. And I always come back with the response that part of the reason I'm really self-aware is because I made a point of getting to know myself. Mm-hmm. And I didn't make that point just because one day I woke up and thought, oh, the best way to do stuff is to become self-aware. I made that point because I made mistakes. Mm-hmm. I took the job I shouldn't have taken and ended up heading down the wrong path for a while. I, had the leadership deal that I needed to deal with that nearly sunk my career. I've made all those mistakes. The point was that rather than trying to brush them under the carpet or push them aside, and I'm not saying I necessarily looked at them in the instant they happened, I reflected on them. Every time I went to take a new step, I reflected on why something didn't work or what I needed to change or do differently to make sure that this time it actually went the way it was supposed to. And it takes a lot because it's not much fun looking at your mistakes because particularly, once again, as women, we tend to do this. And I think this, rather than a gender thing, although I do have a friend that might argue that it is a biological trait, I think that rather than a biological trait, it's a culturally ingrained trait. So from when we're little girls, we are often put in situations as little girls where we're effectively taught that we need to, be quieter about what we do. We need to be more delicate because that's not what a lady does. We need to be gentler about the way we respond to stuff because a lady doesn't do things. And once again, I do realize it's a generational thing and the current generations coming through don't have quite so much of that. But there is still a level of it. Mm-hmm. And because of that, when we're reflecting as women, we have all these little voices running through our head going, oh my God, I've turned into that shrew. And it's like, no, you haven't. Was that a good thing to do? If it was a good thing to do, that's okay. Don't take that away. What was it that didn't work? Try to stand back and instead of, looking at it through the cultural lens that your mother and your aunt and your sisters and your friends and whatever have laid down on you over your life, try to look at it through an unbiased lens of, as an individual, did I do this right? If so, then that's good quality. If I didn't, why was it? Why didn't it work? What about it didn't work? So you start to become more self-aware of what it is about you that's good. Because one of the things I love is a person, regardless of their gender, who is able to know what they're doing, articulate what they're doing, get that information across in a strong and confident manner, to me is a great leader. And to me, I don't give a crap what their gender is as long as they're confident in what they do. Because the minute you start to show those leaks of oh, they're going to think I'm this, then you're undermining your own self-confidence and you're undermining your own self-awareness as well.
Oh, wow. That is true. I'm finding that to be true in corporate and as an entrepreneur. You are so right about getting to know yourself. And I think as you age, as you come in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, everybody ought to take a step back and really reevaluate, reacquaint yourself with who you are, because we change so much so that we can be authentic to ourselves for the work that's before us. Wow. And this is part of this conversation. You're covering step-by-step strategies for climbing the corporate ladder. This is coming from your book. I want everybody to know that, because this is the reason why I'm advocating be sure to get her book. But there's another thing. There are 3 more things, Maggie, that just jumped out to me from your book. You are spot on. Conquering the voice that is telling you you're not good enough. You hear that voice in corporate. You hear that voice when you're an entrepreneur. Would you speak to that, please?
Okay, so and I'll speak to both sides because I must admit, one of my favorite authors on this area is a lady called Tara Moore, and she writes a wonderful book which is called Playing Big, and she talks about the voices in our head a lot, and there are a lot of us that actually touch on it, and we've all got them. And I always talk about the fact that the voice in my head is my mum, because I love my mum. My mum's wonderful. She's an amazing woman and did amazing things. But unfortunately, growing up, I never heard her praise me. So what happened is I grew up with this little negative voice in my head that said, well, you did that, but. So the little but wrote in, and it just became that little voice. So I know that's one of the voices that go there. But part of the way to counteract those negative voices in your head is, as Tara actually brings up really well, is also be aware of the positive voices. And I often get people to do activities where they will keep a notebook or a journal with them for a day or a couple of days, and every time one of those little voices flips across your brain, when you're doing something up and so you might be working on a project or something, and you realize you've just spent half an hour going down the wrong track, and the little voice in your head goes, oh, you idiot, of course you've messed that up, that's the sort of stuff you always do. And you are aware that little voice springs up. The point is we don't usually pay attention to it. So I ask people to pay attention to it, because what I learned is as you start to pay attention to it and start to look at why that voice pops up. So the reason I can tell you that the voice in my head's my mum, and part of the reason it's there is because in my life I never heard her give me a compliment. Is because I sat down and had to think about, why was that popping up? Why did I keep saying that? Why do I feel that way when that happens? And by asking those questions, it helps. And on the opposite side, when the positive voices pop up, it's like, why is that voice popping up now? Why do I need a cheerleader, or why is it that I feel so good that the little voice pops up and says, yeah, we're really great at this stuff, aren't we? Why does that come in? Once again, look at why those things come into place. And once again, it helps you to understand them, and it also helps you to overcome those little things, because we often, you've had Oprah talk about it and Michelle Obama talk about the whole imposter syndrome thing, and those voices are part of what forms the base of that imposter syndrome. The ones that say, oh my God, they're going to find out that I've been absolutely, faking it the whole way through. The comment that we make, oh no, that was just luck. And it's like, it's not luck. You worked hard to get there. But we do that once again because it's the language of talking things down, and they become those voices whether we mean them to or not.
Well, I tell you what, that part of your book stuck out to me, because I can't tell you how many people have been on this show, and they've admitted to the imposter syndrome and alluded to other people that have been on their shows when I've had sister podcasters on, and that is universal. So now we know, pay attention to it. And I've learned to understand where that imposter syndrome is coming from way back when I was a kid. So I've done what you said, pay attention to it so that you can counteract it. Because what I found is if you don't pay attention to it, it will suck you in so deeply until you'll be paralyzed and you won't do anything, at least for myself. So, and then you won't be able to climb the corporate ladder. You say that, hey, the good old boy team is there. They're right, and there's no room for me. And oh my God, So
and do you know what? You don't want to hear what's going on in their heads. I'll tell you.
Oh no. Now that's dangerous territory right there. If they're honest, that's dangerous territory.
Yep.
Another thing that's jumped out to me is when you said, learn to use a sense of community to climb the ladder. And the first thing that I thought, I'm going to ask her about that, because people are making the difference these days between managers and leaders. So I want to put a twist on this. If you are a manager, then is it impossible for you to lead with a sense of community?
Not necessarily, but there are very strong differences between someone who's a manager and someone who's a leader. So someone who's a manager has a title and has responsibilities as part of that title, but they may not actually be a leader. As in, they may not have the qualities or the ability to engage with their team or their community in order to inspire people to follow them. Whereas you can have someone who is a leader who is not a manager, who doesn't have the title of being a leader, but he's able to actually inspire people to follow them because they've got that sense of connectedness and community. And it's all about, to me, a true leader is someone who's not afraid of actually praising or having somebody else effectively being the person that's better than they are. I always maintained that I knew I'd done my job well if the person who replaced me was better than me. And the reason why I always took that logic is because part of that sense of community and part of being a really good leader as opposed to just a manager is recognizing the qualities that your community has, or your team, if you're looking at it from a workplace perspective, regardless of what perspective you're looking at, recognize the qualities they have. So, who's the person that's data driven and can see the potential negatives in every situation? There's your risk manager. Who's the person who, is able to see the bigger picture and see, the different paths that we can potentially head down? Who's the person that can take that and plonk the detail in that's needed to be there? So being able to understand who each of those people are and making sure that you're actually working with your team in such a way that they feel like they belong together, that they feel like they're working together, and they feel like that as a community, they're actually creating the success that each of them are actually winning from, rather than just one person winning from it. And to me, that's the sense of a true leader. And it's one of the things that when we look at styles of leadership and the way we assign genders to it, because of at the history of males tending to lead in a particular way, mainly because they tend to hire in their likeness, so they replace their type of leader with the same type of leader. We tend to assign a more competitive style of leadership to being a masculine style of leadership, whereas that more community style that looks at how everybody works together being a more feminine style. And they're not necessarily those genders, but the point is the community style of leadership is the way forward. And it is the new paradigm that is actually going to shift the ability of businesses, of community organisations, of large corporate organisations, of government organisations. It's going to shift their ability to become more sustainable, more productive, and longer lasting than where we currently stand.
It's certainly a mind shift. It's and it's long overdue. Out with the manager, in with the leader. Certainly. Yep. And you know what? these points that you are sharing with us now, once a person leaves corporate and they do become an entrepreneur, if they keep in mind what you are teaching in your book, then when they're building their team, when they're building their business, then they're going to be successful. They're going to be ready to just take on the world. So this is good stuff that you're sharing with us. It is.
Yeah. It's the same sort of program, basically, regardless of whether you're looking at it from a corporate perspective or from the perspective of building your own business or from the perspective of running a not-for-profit organisation. At the end of the day, it's about, understanding what your goals are, understanding who you are, understanding who surround you, and understanding how that works together in order to create the best result.
Wow. And you know what? When I hear you say that, Maggie, it takes me back to getting to know yourself and that big C word, clarity.
Yeah.
Clarity with every step, that bold step that you take, make sure that there's clarity. Wow.
Yeah.
I just have one other thing from your book, one other point from your book. I loved when you asked the question, whose ladder are you climbing? At first I laughed because it goes back to, whose ladder are you climbing and how to learn to make it yours? Because most of the time we aren't climbing our own ladder. So can you speak to that, please?
So I suppose from my own personal perspective, as I said, one of the things that everyone's kind of in awe of is I became the executive chairman of the board of a large agricultural company in Australia at the age of 32. I received, company director scholarships. I sat on multiple manufacturing boards, etc., all in that time. And part of the reason I was there was because I just happened to be good at it, and everyone told me that's what I should do. But what I realized is I took a 12-month sabbatical out of that position and headed up a not-for-profit, which was, fortunately for me, I got the added bonus of the fact that the organisation has general consultative status to the United Nations. So I got to see a very different perspective of things. But what actually happened is when I stepped down from that role and went to go back to corporate, I suddenly had my eyes wide open, and I realized that even though I had this whole path mapped out that I was going to go back in at a different level into a large multinational with the aim to eventually becoming the CEO of said large multinational and all the rest of it, I realized that actually that wasn't my ladder. That was the ladder that had basically been prescribed by people around me because, well, you're good at this, so this is what you should do. And I realized that my genius, while it could take me up that ladder, could also take me in a totally different direction. And this different direction was something that sang to me. It made me feel whole. It wasn't just, I'm good at this. It was, I'm good at this and I love what I'm doing and I love the impact that I'm able to have and I'm loving the difference that I'm able to make. So it's not just about doing what you're passionate about, because sometimes what you're passionate about is not going to make you money, but it's about having that right combination and it being you recognizing that it's your choice, not just because it's what someone else said you should do. And it's a conversation I often have with school kids in particular, because I like to explain to them a couple of things. And the first one being, do you know what, at the age of 16, 17, 18, you got your whole life ahead of you and it doesn't matter if you change your mind. Because we spend so much time at that age trying to tell them that they're deciding the rest of their life, and that's rubbish. It's utter rubbish. And it's the fact that, we need to realise that, you know what, sometimes we may have started climbing our own ladder and it might have been the right ladder, but somewhere along the way things changed and we're now on the wrong path, and it's okay to step off that ladder and step onto another one. It might be at the same level. We might step down in order to step back up, whatever it is we need to do to make sure that the path we're following is the path that we want to be on and that we feel comfortable with being on, that sits with our values, that sits with our lifestyle, that sits with what we want to do within the world.
That is saying that you summed it all up, actually. I mean, we could really, as they say, drop the mic right now, because when we look at and speaking of the boomers, and I think that this is probably global, so many boomers are retiring, but they're not retiring. They're stepping back corporate in a brand new position, something that they want to do, something that's not just dropped in their lap.
Yeah.
It's by choice. Even for myself to start this podcast, it was my choice versus working at a major corporation. And I mean, it's like night and day. So what I hear you say to everybody is give yourself permission to pivot and change. Yeah. Give yourself permission. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Do that. And if I just want to get this out also because I totally agree with you concerning the younger generation. You can make your choice, make your choices and change, and it's totally all right. I don't care at 5 years old, you want to be a pilot. At 20 years old, you decide you want to be a fashion model, whatever, you give yourself permission. So. Yeah.
And it is important. And it's one of the things I always, when I introduce it, I always say to people, in my lifetime, I've been an engineer, a teacher, I've been in the army, I've worked in agriculture, I've worked in manufacturing and oil and gas, I've worked in education, in finance. You don't have to decide the rest of your life today.
Yes. I love that, Maggie. I mean, when you name everything off, I wouldn't even picture you in some of those arenas, but then there's that thing of diversity. Would you say that the older you get, the more curious you get, and maybe that's why you know some of in this arena and something over here? And I think that you're probably just a naturally curious type of woman.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And it's also part of the reason that regardless of where I shift in my life, I will honestly say that if people ask me, what I am, even though I might say, well, I'm a keynote speaker and I'm a consultant or whatever, at the base of it, I'm an engineer. And the reason why I always say I'm an engineer is because one of the fundamentals of an engineer as a persona is that they're curious. I want to know how things work and why they work that way. So, as you said in the introduction, regardless of whether it's a machine and pulling it apart to see how it works and how it might be able to come better to work better, or if it's a human being, and it's one of the bits where I get to be a little cheeky because I can be very thing orientated as opposed to people's feelings orientated at times. But to me, people are something that's a natural curiosity to me. I want to understand why somebody thinks the way they think and why they do things the way they do things and why they act the way they do and why they interact with other people the way they do. So my natural curiosity is to tear that down and put it together. And you can't do that if you're just in one place all the time. So as a component of that, it means that it fits so nicely with my drive to travel to different places, to learn different cultures, to live in different cultures, to interact with people from different cultures, which has, given me that lovely burst of life where I've got to live in bush communities in the middle of Tanzania with no running water and electricity, and I've lived in Iraq and I've lived in the United States and the UK. So I've had everything from first world to third world, and I've enjoyed every minute of every experience because it's taught me something new and I've learnt something new. So yeah.
That's the reason why you are Maggie Georgopoulos. That's the reason why. Quite an amazing lady. Amazing. I appreciate this time that you spent with us. Gosh, there's just one other question that I want to ask, and I'm looking at the time, and I know I have to move it along, but this thing of balance, and you've traveled the globe, you've been in many different situations, but when we come back to corporate America and our mental health, this thing of workplace balance, will you speak to that briefly? Is that just a fallacy? Because I never found workplace balance myself. Now, maybe that's just me. I think that there's another way to look at that. What are your thoughts on it?
Once again, you might pick up on the fact that I'm a bit of an avid reader as well. So there's a book called The One Thing, and they talk about the fact that the idea of balance is a myth. And it is a myth, because if you want to look at your life properly, at some stage, regardless of what you do, something has to give in order for you to have something else. And part of the reason that becomes the case is because there are only so many hours in a day. Each individual knows where their level is, but we all need a certain amount of sleep. We all need a certain amount of nutrients. We all need a certain amount of downtime just so our brain's not constantly on. And it's different for everybody. So my so-called balance is not yours, and my balance is created in a way that suits me. So my balance may actually be that I work longer hours because that's what I enjoy and that's what my big drive is at the moment. Whereas your balance might be that you actually give a little bit more time to being at home with your family or whatever it is, because that's where you want to be at the moment. And the point is understanding what your priorities are and creating your so-called balance in order to meet those priorities. And if that means that the role that you're in is not going to meet those priorities, then it means maybe you need to start looking for a different role. And I think where businesses come in and need to be more wise to this is, I think businesses, regardless of whether it's corporate America or whether it's entrepreneurial America or anywhere in the world, businesses need to start to understand that we're at the dawn of a completely new age. There are no borders anymore when it comes to communication. I mean, I'm sitting in a flat in Glasgow and I'm chatting to you while you're sitting in the United States. And that is possible because of the technology we've got in place. And as a result of that technology, we need to be more open to the fact that actually I can create that person that wants to be able to spend more time with their family, can still deliver what I want them to deliver if I give them the flexibility to be able to potentially deliver some of that from their home and be able to flex what time of the day they actually focus on that, as long as they meet the deadlines. And so many other options in that. And that's where it comes back to, we need to be open to the conversations about looking after mental health, because everybody is different in what they need for their mental health to be in a good place. Everybody's different for what they need for their physical health to be in a good place. And these are responsibilities of organisations, not just the individuals, because we need to provide the place for people to be able to thrive, not just survive.
Once again, I tell you what, real game changer, changing how we approach the jobs that we work, the organizations, how their responsibility to us so that we can be the best employees, and in the entrepreneurial world, shaping how we form our teams. Maggie, you've given us so much information. I tell you what, I hope, and I always advocate, you have to listen more than one time to these episodes, because Maggie has really you've poured it into us, and you're leaving us with a very special offer. So I'm glad that people held on to the very end, because you are going to want to take Maggie up on this. She's happy to offer a downloadable copy of her book, Up the Ladder in a Skirt. If they're interested, you just need to tweet with the hashtag Up the Ladder in a Skirt. With what one takeaway from, add one takeaway from today's show. And my God, there's so many, but she's only asking that you add one takeaway, and tweet this over to at MAGSINSPIRES, including tagging the show, that we can help promote the show a little bit. That's great. Promote this, because and I'm not just saying that because I want numbers. I want people to hear. I want people to understand about mental health in the workplace. I wanted them to understand about climbing the corporate ladder, because you are from this brand new age of leadership in corporate, brand new age of leadership, period. So what you're laying down for us today are guidelines. It's definitely a handbook that you are giving away to everyone that must be followed. So Maggie, thank you again Thank you. I'm looking at the time. We have most of the time our conversations are 30 minutes, but there was no way we could get all of this in 30 minutes. So any last parting words? I just feel as though there's so much still to be said until I hate to let you go,
Yeah, well, that's okay. I'm the conversation has been wonderful, and thank you so much for having me on the show. My one thing, as I said, please do tweet with the hashtag and your takeaway, because it'll create a conversation that'll keep going. And this is an amazing program and deserves the conversations. But most of all, just remember to be you, because that's the best person you can be.
That is sage advice. And what I like about Maggie is that she's an avid reader, as she already stated. But what she's presenting to us comes from been there, done that. I know this. She's speaking from where she's been, what she knows, what she's observed. And it doesn't get more authentic than that. So I thank you, listeners, so very much for your time, for your attention. And everything that Maggie has brought to us, I really know that it's good for corporate, and it is good for when you reinvent yourself. Speaking of reinvention, I reinvented myself. I left corporate, and now I am a podcaster, an author, and I want to pass on as much information as I can, which I do through these shows. That's the power of being a podcaster. If you want to know more about my story and the story of 4 other women that I've included in my book, go over to herbusinesshervoice.com. No fluff, just a lot of how we did it. And look at us now. No bragging, just how we did it. You can do it also. You can reinvent yourself. So that's it for another episode. We'll be back next week. And wow, I can't get off the line, but I know that I must. So I'm going to close it out right here. Her business, her voice, her conversation. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation with Margot Levette. Since you like what you heard, go over to herbusinesshervoice.com to get a copy of her book. Subscribe to the show and receive updates, free products, and offers. Be sure to let family, friends, and colleagues know about the show. Margot returns next week with a brand new dialogue on Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation.
Okay. VerKRadio.com, certified #1 digital talk radio station in the world. The power of women.